All right, I am now joined by GTAA producer Forrest Miller and Jacobin deputy editor Micah Uetricht. So I just want to kick off with a quick question. Either one of you feel free to jump in here. Are you an assassin?
I'm a soldier.
You're neither. You're an errand boy sent to pick up the bill. Yeah, so we are, of course, talking about Francis Ford Coppola's 1979 classic Apocalypse Now, and also the behind-the-scenes stuff about Apocalypse Now from the documentary made by Coppola's wife, Hearts of Darkness. And all of this started because Micah last week had posted that he just watched Hearts of Darkness, and he had stuff to say about it. And so since we've been trying to do more cultural content on here, movie streams and whatnot, I thought this might be a fun one. Plus, it gave me an excuse to rewatch both Hearts of Darkness, which I'd seen once before, and Apocalypse Now, which I'd seen, 700 or so times before, but not in a very long time. I saw it many times in my 20s, and I remember visiting my little brother in California in like 2008 or 9, I want to say. And at that point, I know it had already been a few years since the last time I'd watched it, but it was on in the living room, and I remember being struck by the fact that I could still remember every line of it as it was coming, and that was still true when I watched it last night. But I really enjoyed it. So thank you, Micah, for giving me an excuse to do that.
Yeah, as a way of explanation, I was for a very long time one of those leftists, pre 2016, like pre Bernie, who was like, I don't own a television, right? Like I don't bother with such petty bourgeois frivolity. They're trying to rot your brain, man, with the TV. So not on purpose, but for several years, I just sort of like haven't had a TV. And 2020 was finally the year where we finally got one. And so I've been like, oh my God, I got to catch up. I got to watch, I gotta watch Apocalypse Now. I gotta watch Hearts of Darkness. I gotta get caught up on my pot. Did you know that movies are really good and like sometimes very nuanced? And I have complex feelings about this. So I'm 33, but I'm getting caught up to about 20, 21-year-olds takes on pop culture.
I only found out movies were good last week when we watched Casino. I've never had put those things together before.
Yeah, Casino, right? Yeah, fair enough. Well, look, I'll tell you my experience was a little bit different. So back in the VHS era, when I was in college, I was going to Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's where I went to college, and there was a point, I started out at community college. I transferred a couple times. I ended up there. I started studying philosophy, and I was really into it. And also, this was a part of Grand Rapids where not very much was going on. And so I kind of fell into this thing.
I would disagree with you. As somebody who also attended Aquinas College, and I'll defend East Grand Rapids, East Town, East Grand Rapids. But anyway, continue. This stream's not about Grand Rapids.
I mean, there are like 2 nice coffee shops, but whatever.
So sorry to throw you off. I just had to.
And I should say, by the way, anybody who thinks that this is more clannish than it is a complete coincidence. I found out long after meeting Mike that he also attended Aquinas. But
you didn't set up a Hearts of Grand Rapids.
Yeah. So anyway, I fell into a thing where I basically spent most of my time, studying and, doing, reading stuff for classes and related to that. And I was at that point, I had a single dorm room, and when I wasn't studying, I was pretty much watching one of the same, 5 or 6 VHS movies on VHS. So I think The Godfather, Goodfellas, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, Apocalypse Now was definitely in that rotation. So I've seen it like this was a period of time my RA in my dorm told me later that he thought I'd moved out. Like I was doing very little except for, reading and watching movies, in my room. So I've seen this movie many times, but it was the first time in a very long time, and it was an interesting rewatch. So I guess one way to enter into this would be to just start by talking about what happens in the movie itself, and then we can, move into larger themes and talk about Hearts of Darkness and all of that.
Which versions have you watched? Have you watched the the second edit and I guess there's a bunch of edits. I watched the theatrical one twice. I don't think I've watched the re-edit of it.
I watched the Redux, the one that was like a full 3 hours long. I think there's one other version that's even longer, maybe, but that's longer than the theatrical release, I think.
Yeah, so mostly I've watched the theatrical release, and the theatrical release is what I watched last night. I have seen Redux, but not that many times because I didn't actually like it that much. Like I thought I thought some of the scenes that were restored to it were interesting, and I'm glad I watched them. But honestly, I think the movie flows better without them. That'll be my hot take on that. And then I know there's like a subsequent edit, but I never ended up watching that. Yeah, the final cut is from 2019. Jacob says in chat, and the Redux is from 2001. Which sounds right, So I definitely would have watched it then because that was right in the era when I was watching these movies all the time. So fair enough. The movie. Starts out as President Bartlett has just returned for his second, or some second or third tour in Vietnam. He is actually, I mean, this was funny watching Hearts of Darkness because he looks like like it's the later Martin Sheen who looks like the West Wing character, doing the flashbacks and talking about filming the movie. Which is jarring, that he's this, having, spent also more time than I'd probably care to admit, watching the West Wing, I have all the usual criticisms of the worldview of the show, but it's very watchable. So the comfortable liberal icon, in the West Wing is talking about playing this character.
Although a man, to give him his due, also has like a left history of his own, including I remember being in college and going to the School of the Americas protests from the two Catholic colleges I went to, Aquinas and Loyola.
I did that too. I did the field trip to Fort Benning.
Right, exactly. So you probably watched the documentary about the SOA that he narrates, and he has this long history with CSPES, the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. So, credit where credit is due to Martin Sheen.
Fair enough. So Martin Sheen's character, Captain Willard, has returned to Vietnam. And he's waiting for a mission. It seems like the way it's set up at the beginning of the movie, basically what he's gone through in Vietnam and in the past, and being very into it. He's some sort of shadowy military intelligence person at this point with a bunch of history of covert operations that he's unwilling to discuss even with top brass. And that experience has ruined him for normal life. He said that he hasn't set when he finally got home, he wanted to, when he was there, he was only thinking about going home. But when he finally got home, he realized he wanted to go back to Vietnam. He hadn't said a word to his wife until he said yes to a divorce. And so he's sort of drinking and going quietly insane in his hotel room. And in a very telling moment when the MPs come to bring him to military intelligence to give him his next mission, he thinks that they're there to arrest him. He asks
to court-martial him. And
what's that?
To court-martial him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So they are not. So they bring him to a nice office where he has lunch with Harrison Ford and some other people. And they play him all love to repeat past guest Matt Crispin. What I keep thinking of is Colonel Kurtz's grill stream. He talks about, seeing a snail, climb up the edge of a straight razor and all that stuff, which they play him to show him that Colonel Kurtz has gone completely insane, and therefore must be terminated with extreme prejudice. I did think it was interesting that in that scene, the military intelligence guys who are giving him the mission, obviously, the movie is, it's a riff on Joseph Conrad, which is about, earlier explicit colonialism. And in that scene, they have one of these military intelligence guys refer to the Vietnamese as the natives, which I thought was interesting. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that anybody in that position at that time would have been quite as comfortable, right, with thinking of this as just a continuation of colonialism, to use that term. But who knows? And then at the end of the scene, small detail I always noticed, they when they give him the mission and he accepts it, they give him a cigarette, a Marlboro Red, and then later on he's on the boat. And he tries to give the captain of the boat a cigarette, and the captain refuses it. Which seems to be sort of a way of saying, okay, I'm not quite in this with you. But he goes on the boat, and they start, and we're introduced to this cast of characters on the boat, and we start to get one of the big things that we see in this movie, right? So I know when we talked about this beforehand, Micah, you made the comment, which is, I think, clearly correct, that this isn't exactly a movie about the Vietnam War, but it is a movie based on a sort of, I don't know, it's kind of a fever dream about the Vietnam War, so it is and it isn't.
The movie only could have been the movie that it was, given the fact that the Vietnam War was what it was. You know what I mean? Like, if this had been some kind of triumphant U.S. military victory, like some kind of World War II style thing, which just all pomp and circumstance, rah, rah, our boys did it, then you couldn't make a movie like this about Vietnam.
Yeah, no, that seems totally right. By the way, I saw somebody in the chat, talk about the schedule. Goodfellas is next week. So yeah. Yeah, no, that's totally right. I think it could only have been done in the context of a losing war, and one that was widely perceived as being like kind of an extension, of past colonialism, which is a connection that, to give the scenes that were restored in Redux their due. A connection that was made even more explicitly there than it already was by having the military intelligence guy refer to the Vietnamese as the natives, because one of those scenes, which we also see in the making of documentary Hearts of Darkness, is of a French plantation that's still hanging on after all these years. And one of the lines in Willard's voiceover when he's talking about that French plantation is these guys are hanging on by their fingernails. Of course, so are we. We've just got more fingernails. So yeah, it's definitely the fact that everybody knows that this is a war that we lost, and was widely perceived as not only a war that we happened to lose, but that was like unwinnable by its nature. I think by 1979. That was a pretty universal narrative, is definitely all over the place in this movie. And even though the Vietnamese, in a weird way, are almost just sort of the background of the movie, I'm sure we'll get into that. But a big thing that's going on in the movie from very early on, when he first gets on the boat and we're introduced to all the people on the boat, is that we see, we consistently get this image of American society as it was, in the Vietnam era. Everybody's, getting high and listening to rock music and all that stuff, that people are coming out of this, and this is being sort of violently imposed on this peasant society. It's like one of the first things you see when he gets on the boat is Lance, I think, is the surfer. Am I getting the okay? So they Lance, who is like a really impressive competitive surfer back home, surfing in the back of the boat while Clean is blasting the Rolling Stones, and so they're blasting the Rolling Stones and surfing and making huge waves behind them, while these like Vietnamese fishermen are just staring at them like, what the fuck is going on here?
It's interesting that in the documentary they're talking about how when they originally wrote it during the Vietnam War, all these things weren't talked about necessarily, like the drug use inside of it, like the psychedelic part of it. And I don't know, I found that fact interesting, that they were kind of just writing things that people were telling them on the ground, at the time.
Yeah, a lot of that came from, I think, Michael Hare's book Dispatches, which I finished reading about a week ago. And watching both Apocalypse Now and Full Metal Jacket, he had writing credits on both of those movies, and I think he's credited for mostly writing the narration for Apocalypse Now, but there are a bunch of little details, like narrative details, that seem very clearly taken. I don't know if the timing lines up, because I think Hare's book came out in '77, and they were already underway filming and writing and filming Apocalypse Now. But there's just so much stuff in both of those movies that seems like it's taken directly from Hare, and a lot of that is that the details of what life was actually like for these soldiers, including all the drug use and everything else. Hare was the first one to really write about all of that stuff and put it out in the open, and then that becomes a really central piece of Apocalypse Now, obviously.
And in the documentary, John Milius, the guy that wrote the original script, also says that he took stories from people that were friends of his that were over there at the time when he wrote those, like when he wrote pieces of it. I mean, I don't know if that's just him taking credit for other people's writing as a writing team, but
yeah, I mean, it's funny actually. There's a scene in this movie that's very close to something I've heard, third hand from my. I think I could sell this anonymous person out. It's been long enough, and say this on stream that when my dad used to work at the motor wheel auto factory in Lansing, he said there's a guy he worked with there who was in Vietnam who'd taken acid for the first time, and it like hit like just before a firefight, and so I've always like heard that story and thought about like what that would possibly be like, and of course there's a scene in the movie that's very close to that. Although presumably in that guy's case, not the first or 20th time.
Yeah,
he'd done that. So
I like the documentary part too, where he's talking about it, and he's like, "Were you on acid at that moment?" And he's like, "Not that moment." And he's like, "I was on something else." And he's like, "Okay, what else?" He's like, "Oh, just a bunch of speed."
Yeah.
Hanging out doing speed, like.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there's Lance as the surfer. There's Clean, who's already been mentioned. This very young black guy who's on the boat, who they said comes from some South Bronx shithole. That's in Martin Sheen's narration. And then there's Chef, who is a chef. He's a saucier from New Orleans. Say he's wound a little too tight for Vietnam. Was probably wound a little too tight for New Orleans. And Chief, who's the captain, who's the captain of the boat, and basically over the course of, well, actually the first major thing they hit is Kilgore and the Air Cav, who are these. So it's the air cavalry, and this is the part of the movie we were talking about beforehand. Trying to strike a balance between, obviously I don't think that three socialists can talk about Apocalypse Now without talking about imperialism and the Vietnam War and all that stuff. But I do want to talk about it as a movie and not be monomaniacally political. But this was the moment on this particular rewatch when they run into these guys, and the way that it's portrayed, what Kilgore and the Air Cav are doing. When I started thinking about you could, it's like you almost imagine. It's like in a weird way, this is like the depiction of the casually committed atrocities at this point in the movie. it's like almost like having a movie about sort of existential self-discovery that just happened to be set among Waffen SS soldiers in the Eastern Front. Like they're doing. Yeah, sorry, you were going to say, Micah.
That scene to me, I mean, you watch it as a socialist, as a person who cares about the lives of people who are not Americans, and it's like the first seriously disturbing scene of the movie. Obviously, I mean, you're watching Vietnamese people get mowed down and get their napalm dropped on them and their villages bombed, etc. It's a really disturbing scene, and it's all done basically so Kilgore can get some surfing in, right? That's the whole that's the whole reason for landing there, is so that they and then they're trying to do this surfing as like mortar rounds are exploding around them, including in the water. And so I watched that, and I was very disturbed by that scene, but I can't remember if it was in Hearts of Darkness or there's a great YouTube documentary series about the making of the movie that I have been watching. I'll look up the name of it in a second. But somebody mentions that that scene has been used to pump soldiers up to go to war. I don't want to get it wrong. I think it was somebody mentioned about Iraq. So that would have been a later, probably would have been the YouTube series I watched. But and that kind of shook me because in watching that, you're like, this is obvious. We're witnessing insane, brutal human rights atrocities happening in front of us, and yet it's sort of done in such a way where you could view Kilgore as this badass, if not from a leftist perspective, obviously, but like if somebody wanted to see that in that scene, some kind of reactionary or some soldier who's trying to get pumped up to go to war, they could choose to interpret that scene. Oh, isn't it great? Look at this badass Kilgore who like doesn't give a shit about mortars going around him. He just wants to catch some waves because that's how much of a badass he is, and he's willing to kill some Vietnamese so that he can hang 10 or whatever.
There's that really striking moment where the mortar goes off behind him and he doesn't even flinch, and he's just like, well, sooner or later this war is going to end, and it's as if like they're not in the middle of an intense battle scene.
But he's literally I should just say quickly, right? Like the things to remind anybody who hasn't seen the movie in a while, the things that are going on in this scene are. First, they meet up with the air cav, and you see like bleeding civilians, some of them children, horrible shit going on. At the same time as there's like a cat, like they're evacuating, doing what happened a lot in Vietnam, which is basically dispossessing people from villages, where they had fights with the Viet Cong, and moving them to what are euphemistically called strategic hamlets. So you have people being, Vietnamese peasants being loaded into the back of a truck as there's like all this like fire in the sky and this like cow or something being like airlifted out by a helicopter, and this like priest, giving a mass at the same time. The whole thing is, very apocalyptic. And Kilgore is out there passing out death cards, putting cards on top of corpses so people know who did this. And then later, after because it turns out Kilgore is obsessed with surfing, the way that Willard convinces Kilgore to take him where he needs to go is that there's one of the places it can go that has great waves, and so in order to clear it out, this is the if people remember one sequence from Apocalypse Now, this is it. They send the they bomb the area with and napalm it from helicopters while blasting Wagner, and during that, right, to Forrest's point, like there's actually a scene where it looks like the helicopter's been hit. It turns out it was just a flare, and Kilgore is literally sitting there drinking a mug of coffee, just totally unbothered by it. Right? They say he's in Willard's voiceover. He says, you can just tell that he's not even going to get a scratch here, and makes him this larger than life character. And I guess to Micah's point, I think that part of the power of the scene probably comes from the fact that it's both. That it is, I think it is very like I mean, I think the movie overall, even though, we really don't get almost any hint to the Vietnamese point of view, which I'm sure we'll talk about, but I think in many ways is very anti-imperialist, not in that it's even the point of the movie, but it's just sort of taken for granted, as part of the setup. But it's both showing you the brutality and horror of this, which, I mean, there's a scene earlier where Willard says in voiceover, with regard to his mission to terminate Kurtz's command, that arresting someone for murder out here is like passing out speeding tickets on the Indy 500. So you're seeing the brutality and horror of it, but the movie is also definitely sucking you in to, there's something like crazy cool about these guys, and I think it's like playing with the tension, between those two things. So I mean, I have to say I'm kind of not surprised by it, both in the sense that, look, everybody likes seeing themselves depicted in movies. There are gangsters who like Goodfellas. There are Wall Street assholes who like Wolf of Wall Street. Like no matter how negative the depiction is, if there's something about it that even in passing makes them look sort of cool, people will latch on to that. But it's also not totally outside of what Coppola is up to, with the storytelling, that he, because it is this, journey into the heart of darkness, he wants you, I think, to be both attracted to and repulsed by, this kind of glorified violence.
He says somewhere that he doesn't consider it an anti-war film, which I think you could quibble with, but I think he's saying that because it has that ambiguity to it. I mean, like, you can watch it, like even the Wagner thing, like somebody who doesn't know anything about Wagner, they're like, hell yeah, this is badass. But if you know anything about Wagner, what Wagner has been used for and what he believed in. Like, it's if you're blasting Wagner as you're coming into to do a military mission, that's probably not meant to cast you in a particularly great light, but the average person isn't gonna make that association,
And I think even if you don't know that Wagner himself, was very anti-Semitic and had some right-wing views, I think the more pertinent fact is like, okay, free association test, right? What would be the political movement you would associate with Wagner? Right. So I think there's some, I think there's an unsubtle connection made there. I think I see what he means when he says it's not an anti-war movie, but again, I think it's not an anti-war movie in the sense of being a movie about getting people to feel a certain way about the Vietnam War.
Right.
I think it's an anti-war movie in the sense that there's like an anti-war way of looking at all of this that I think for Coppola at that time, was just assumed. Right. It was just like, yes, of course, this was a brutal, murderous, unwinnable war to, try to hang on with all those fingernails to dominate the society that didn't want people that, didn't want us there.
Well, he said it's not anti-war, but he was trying to capture the actual spirit and essence of the Vietnam War. So, I mean, assumably at a time after the war when everybody's pretty much decided no, this was like a fucked up war that we shouldn't have been in. That that encompasses the spirit of the Vietnam War at that point for him. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily anti-all war, but he's definitely he's trying to recapture what happened in the act. You know what I mean?
He's trying to recapture what happens, and I think he does think that what happened in Vietnam was incredibly fucked up, right? I mean, I don't have any doubt whatsoever about that.
I think everybody, at that point, pretty much. I mean, that wasn't like a State Department goal. Probably like the general zeitgeist was that it was a fucked up, brutal war.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it took quite a long time for that to be rehabilitated in the minds of a big chunk of the public. Certainly I've been reading Rick Perlstein's Reaganland, and when there was the debate going on during the Carter administration about, signing a treaty to, cede control of the Panama Canal, that was a big part of what was going on in that debate, that the idea that if it didn't go through, that we'd have to fight, a major war in Panama, I think was horrifying to almost everybody at the time, because the memory was so recent, of Vietnam. by the time we got to like 2004, when you could nominate John Kerry and have the Democratic Convention be like sort of a weird celebration of the war in Vietnam, I think you had to have decades in between, for that to fly.
I was somehow, I don't remember where I heard it, but heard the speech that Kerry gave at the DNC in 2004, where his opening line is like, "I'm John Kerry and I'm reporting for duty." But then if you listen to him at the Winter Soldier thing, he's like, "We chopped heads off, we chopped ears off, we raped people." It's like, why are you bragging about reporting for duty when you yourself acknowledged at Winter Soldier that reporting for duty meant committing these awful atrocities that led you to throw your medals over the fence of the White House? It doesn't really make any sense.
No, exactly. And I think that was always, a big problem with the Kerry campaign, because he was like, he wanted to use the fact that he'd served to get some sort of, patriotic, you can't on defense juice against Bush. But he didn't really ever come up with like a good, he wasn't willing to embrace his subsequent very public years of intense anti-war activism. But of course, that one's going to come up. Like, there's no way to just like skip over that and like expect that the Republicans, weren't going to bring it up. So if he wasn't willing to proudly defend it, there's really no way for that to end well for him.
Well, if you look at how like Jane Fonda is still treated, I mean, she worked with John Kerry at the time a lot. You know what I mean? Like, they appeared places together just at the tail end of the Vietnam War. And if you look at the way, like, I still see old people on Facebook, like really like boomer aged old people on Facebook, still very angry at Jane Fonda for you know what I mean, seeing her as like a traitor and still being like, why have we not hung Jane Fonda? So I mean, Kerry is spineless, but like in a way, it's like, all right, like with him becoming a politician and his image getting rehabilitated, like, it's understandable not to want to go down the same path that Jane Fonda did if you're a kind of spineless politician.
No, for sure. Although I also do think that, I mean, clearly, Kerry, is a very different person, now than he was at the time when he was testifying at the Winter Soldier hearings and tossing his medals over the White House fence and all that stuff. Look, this would be, a very rare example of me saying something nice about Joe Biden, but, supposedly, according to reports at the time, when Kerry was Secretary of State and Biden was Vice President, Kerry wanted to, to go into to Syria after Assad, crossed the red line with chemical weapons. And the line that's been widely quoted is supposedly, while talking about that, Biden said, "Hey, John, you remember Vietnam? You remember how that started?" So I think that, I think the Vietnam Veterans Against the War Kerry is a very different creature than the Senate Kerry, much less the Secretary of State Kerry.
There's also the kind of the manufacturing consent kind of like line on the Vietnam War, which is like, there's a lot of people that were anti-Vietnam that aren't anti-war. You know what I mean? Like the we acknowledge that we've made mistakes in the Vietnam War is not the same as saying like, oh, I'm a dove in all situations, or I'm a dove in, even like most situations that aren't specifically Vietnam.
Yeah, well, and there's that word mistakes, right? Like, like it always skeezes me out, right? Whether it's the, whether it's like the tanky version of saying like, oh yeah, I guess the Great Leap Forward was a mistake, or the American imperialism apologist version, which is, the Vietnam War was a mistake. It's like, no, you have to come up with a different word for massacring millions of people, right? Like that's not a.
As well as somehow we keep making the same mistake over and over again. Somehow
Vietnam was a mistake.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm, in 50 years or so, when we withdraw from Afghanistan, that may become a mistake in retrospect.
Well, there's that one Arrested Development thing where he's like, but it could work for us, and someone made a version of that with like Latin American coups, and it's like an Asian coups where it's like it didn't work in Laos, Cambodia, like Bolivia, like it goes through the whole list, and it's like, but it could work now, like yeah, right. If it were a mistake, you'd think that you wouldn't keep on getting mistakes of quite similar type. And an interesting thing to think about with Apocalypse Now is whether anybody in the movie, or certainly at least to narrow it down, right, whether Martin Sheen's character, Captain Willard, like how he thinks about the Vietnam War, because my sense of this is that how he thinks about it
is that it's a war that happens to be going on.
Yeah.
And so what he wants to do with his life is to, throw himself into intense situations to test himself as a person and to, grow as a person and all this stuff. But it really has very little to do with even really American patriotism or anything like that. He knows. He said in the cut French plantation scene, we're hanging on by our fingernails too. We've just got more fingernails.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and unlike the other guys on the boat, he's not a grunt. He is more of a career soldier who you never hear him say anything about the war one way or the other, right? He's just sort of there to carry out a mission, and that's all he's there to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So they, over the course of the movie, they continue to travel upriver, and generally the further they get upriver, where they're ultimately going, he doesn't reveal this to the boat crew until almost the end. But where Kurtz is camped out is actually in Cambodia, where the U.S. is not supposed to be, but was. In fact, actually, that's something that I remember came up in the 2004 election and the swift boating of John Kerry. That in his Winter Soldier testimony, he casually talked about operations that were happening in Cambodia, and people actually tried to bring that up as in a no, we weren't in Cambodia at that time. So.
Like, oh, we're still doing this. Sorry, I didn't realize that we were still pretending that this was the case.
Right, exactly.
Sorry, Henry Kissinger. I forgot that we weren't in Cambodia.
Yeah, and I always liked Noam Chomsky's line about that, which is that it's like a little weird to use these phrases like secret bombing, right? It's not really very secret for anybody who's there, like they can sort of tell, what's going on. It just means that you don't talk about it in the American media. That's what secret means.
Right.
But as they're going, further north, up the river, towards Cambodia, things get increasingly lurid and chaotic and strange. And so let's think about this. So post Kilgore, they're going upriver. I want to say that one of the next major things to hear is when they run into the USO show.
Right, at some point, yeah.
Yeah. Do you remember the order, Forrest?
I think it's followed by the USO show. I can't remember if the My Lai massacre scene is before or after that.
I think the My Lai massacre scene is after, but I could be wrong.
I feel like there's something in between the Kilgore stuff, and I don't think they instantly get into the USO show because they're kind of traveling for a bit before they get there.
Okay, so that might happen in between. So they're traveling upriver, because when they're not escorting assassins on secret missions, this is a Navy patrol boat, is what it's supposed to be. So they're supposed to do things like search Vietnamese fishing boats. Okay, somebody in the chat says after. Regardless, they're supposed to do things like search Vietnamese fishing boats for weapons, that might be being smuggled to the National Liberation Front, the Viet Cong, and so they pick. Okay, all right. We got the order. We got the order in the chat. So
we're very lucky to have people who clearly have seen the movie maybe more times than we have in the chat here. They know they know this thing front and back.
Yeah, certainly more. Maybe not more times, but certainly more times.
It's hard to when it's all kind of connected, like it's all disconnected chaos. So hard, like to it's like because it's not in like a progressive order in any way.
Yeah, for sure. So Jacob in the chat says it goes Kilgore, then Tiger Scene, then Bunnies, then Massacre, then Dulong Bridge, then French Plantation if you're watching Redux, then Kurtz. So the Tiger, actually the Tiger Scene is probably the one that people are likely to remember. If you remember one scene, it's the helicopters in Wagner. If you remember two, it's that and Never Get Off the Boat. The tiger scene is Chef gets into his head. He really wants to get some mangoes, to cook something with it. So Chef and Captain Willard go on shore together to start looking for mangoes. Chef tells him his a little bit about his history, that he was raised to be a great saucier, and he was going to study in Paris. Then he ended up, he was drafted. He was too disgusted with the way that military cooks were trained to prepare food to do that. So he transferred out of it, which is which is a very small detail, but I think maybe telling, because so much of the movie is about both Kurtz's and Martin Sheen's relationship to the military as an institution, and so this idea that it's this sort of stifling, conformist, shoddiness in the military might be telling there. And then of course they run into a tiger in the jungle, shoot at it, start running back to the boat. The guys on the boat start shooting into the jungle because they assume that it's Charlie, that it's the National Liberation Front, and then they say it's a tiger, and Chef starts muttering, never get off the boat, never get off the boat. And then he
also does the like his freak out where he's ripping his shirt right off his back, and
right, which is a whole thing here too, that everybody, to one extent or another, everybody on the boat in different ways is being changed by the experience. I think probably most dramatically Lance the surfer is a very minor character, but he's certainly the one who seems in some ways to be the most just annihilated on a personality level by the experience.
Yeah, well, I have to say that the chef and the tiger scene, in some ways, to me, is the sort of most. It's very subdued, even though there's a tiger that jumps out. But as he's explaining who he is as a person, he wants to be a saucier. I mean, he's the whole reason they're off the boat is so he can find some mangoes, because he clearly has such a passion for cooking, and he was studying to make sauces, and clearly this guy is not some raving lunatic. This isn't Kilgore, right? This is a grunt who had a whole life at home, and he just wants to make sauce. He just wants to grill, right? He just wants to make sauces, and yet this guy is here in the middle of the Vietnamese jungle being dragged up to Cambodia. And you do have to feel for that kind of rank and file soldier who clearly has no desire to be there, and is somebody whose life, well, as we know, he ends up losing his life, but his life is lost even before he dies to this war that he's been dragged into, and it's just such a great tragedy. There were so many people like him whose lives were decimated because of this war.
It's also the juxtaposition between him and I don't know, an assassin that's trained for this their whole life, kind of, and that is their life. You know what I mean? They're unable to go back and have any kind of normal life. That's kind of a huge juxtaposition between him, between Chef and his desire to go back to New Orleans and just cook, and somebody who is incapable of having a life outside of war and outside of the military. And for sure. That he really does belong, back home. I mean, there was one of the, I think he's reading a letter from somebody in his family, and at one point on the boat, and and he laughs and quotes the line about how, I can't imagine you in Vietnam. I imagine you sitting on the couch, watching TV and drinking a beer. And so certainly unlike Captain Willard or Kurtz, he is, he's clearly, he's clearly somebody who's just trying to get through this, right? So we referred to already to the fishing boat, My Life Massacre scene, and in that scene, right, he's the one who really doesn't want to do it. He wants absolutely nothing to do with searching this boat, because he thinks it can only be trouble. He doesn't know why they're bothering.
he doesn't want to get off the boat, right? He learned his lesson from the tiger. So Chef in some ways, is probably the one who actually might be the most sympathetic character on the boat, and certainly is. And certainly is the one who the most obviously and deeply doesn't want to be there.
Well, Lance and the puppy is also pretty, the way he just kind of picks up the puppy and is taking care of it for the rest of the movie. And at that one point he like loses it and he's like freaking out about it. That was also a very sympathetic, like, I guess kind of almost like childhood return for him. You know what I mean? Like his empathy, I guess, has to go into this puppy, because you can't have empathy for the people you're fighting in a war that you're convinced, want to either kill you, or even if they're just civilians, like, I don't know. It's just
he can't let himself feel empathy for the Vietnamese, but he can let himself feel empathy for a puppy, for sure. Thank you.
Tony Soprano thing all over.
Yeah, exactly. The ducks, totally. Yeah. Ian, thank you so much for the super chat. Says, I give this movie a Hegelian immanent logic rating. There are 3 points of self-developing ways to deal with the contradictions between horrors of war and adequate ethical conception. Also says, the first stage is Kilgore turning his back. Next is the obsession with self and desire. Last is pure insanity with no ethical conception that can reconcile the reality with understanding. So, I'd have to think about it, but that sounds like there's something there.
Dialectic, man.
Yeah, there's actually, funnily enough, there is actually a little riff in this movie about dialectical logic. So after the tiger scene, as they continue upriver, the next stop is the USO, the USO concert, with the Playboy Bunnies, and even that. Is sort of the beginning again. We're getting, as we go further up the river, we're going deeper into chaos that we don't get. It's increasingly feels like we're getting further away from the institutional military having any control over anything that's going on. And so even at the USO tour, when they stop, there's like a commissary there. But it really doesn't seem like anybody has a good handle on, like it seems like the guy behind, the counter at the commissary is just kind of haggling and running things for himself, and is very easily threatened, by Willard when he won't stand for it. And then when they do the USO event with the Playboy Bunnies, it quickly devolves into chaos and people are rushing. Are rushing the stage, and then the bunnies and the military guys who are their handlers all sort of go on to the helicopter in a way that I was wondering if it was supposed to be like a reference to that last helicopter in Saigon, with people like grabbing the like bottom of the helicopter, and people grabbing the people below them.
I have to say,
to me.
Yeah, during that scene, what I was thinking about, and I have been thinking about that, throughout the entire movie, but especially in that scene, is thinking about, which I think I don't know if there were actually Playboy Bunnies who went to Vietnam, but certainly the USO was doing stuff like that, providing that kind of entertainment to troops, right? That's what the USO does. I was just thinking about the contrast with the Viet Cong and with the North Vietnamese with these American soldiers. And it's like these American soldiers are like hooting and hollering and just, their horniness is exploding. It's like coming out of their ears in steam. And the North Vietnamese weren't getting any kind of, North Vietnamese equivalent of the Playboy Bunnies being flown in to entertain them. I mean, like,
Willard makes that point in voiceover. It says Charlie doesn't get a lot of USO.
Exactly. And it's like that's how you funnily enough, in that scene, I'm like, oh yeah, like this is why the U.S. lost this war. Like they need, these troops need like Playboy Bunnies to keep them entertained, while the Viet Cong, who we'll get into, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, we don't get to see an intimate portrait of what they're up to in this or basically any other Vietnam movie. But like they sure as hell are not getting this kind of entertainment. I mean, they're like eating, just like plain rice and cleaning their AK-47 and, living in a tunnel and preparing to defeat the world's largest imperial power. Like that's what they're doing. And
which I should say, cut ahead. I know that you mentioned over email that you've watched quite a few Vietnam movies lately, and you had some thoughts about the general pattern here.
Well, yeah, I mean, not specific to this scene so much, just in the entire Vietnam War genre, and maybe we'll get into this at the end too. I mean, to me, the thing that's so like, this is a great movie from a narrative perspective. Obviously, it's widely considered one of the best movies ever made, and I think it deserves that title, even if it's not a perfect movie, which is really saying something about Coppola and his vision of what he set out to do and what he carried out. Like the fact that it's imperfect, it's an imperfect document that still is maybe one of the best American movies ever made. But like, I feel like there's so much narrative grist that is left on the table in American filmmaking by the fact that we cannot depict what actually happened in Vietnam. We can have these really moving narratives about somebody like, it's a narrative like Apocalypse Now, which is essentially the narrative tension is between one group of Americans and another, right? Like it's the boat going up to find Kurtz. And so it's like American on American, and some Americans have been, like Kurtz, have been driven insane by this war. Others are also insane, but it's a little, their version of insane is okay, and the military brass approves of that kind of insanity. But it's still like an American on American crime that is taking place with Vietnam as the backdrop. Right. But and there's plenty to be gotten from that in terms of a narrative. But this is the most incredible David and Goliath story in all of 20th century, perhaps you could say. Like this incredibly outgunned, poor country fights off the world's greatest imperialist power, takes so many orders of magnitude more casualties in terms of civilians, in terms of military, and it doesn't matter. They still defeat the. I mean, think about how we have movies like this that depict the kind of wrenching pain that Vietnam caused upon Americans, and other movies like The Deer Hunter obviously focus even more on that take place mostly in the U.S. or Rambo, the first Rambo, First Blood. We see the kind of wrenching pain that caused for a country that took, I believe the number is 77,000 fatalities in this war. Well, there were millions of Vietnamese who were killed in this war. I mean, I believe the number is like 2 or 3 million. So like, imagine the kind of pain that is there within these Vietnamese, and imagine the stories that you can tell about how the Vietnamese managed to topple, how the Davids defeated the Goliaths. All that is left on the table. And as much as this is a great movie, I feel like this movie certainly doesn't get into that at all. I mean, when Vietnamese people show up in the movie, it is things like they get mowed down in the boat totally unnecessarily, which is a very important story, obviously, to tell about the Vietnam War. But like, where is our narrative about these guys in tunnels, like just eating rice and defeating the American military? Like that's astonishing, and we never get to hear any of that in American cinema, and we really should. And even among people like Oliver Stone, who are have more explicitly left politics than Francis Ford Coppola. Like, you watch Platoon, like the Vietnamese are still like background set pieces to the main narrative.
They're set pieces, or they're innocent victims, but which again is certainly an important part of the story. But I imagine the war movies from the Vietnamese perspective, totally.
Also, there's an extreme amount of resonance still, also because, this is still this was never what we saw as warfare until Vietnam, but this has been what we've considered warfare since Vietnam. You know what I mean? Like what they've pioneered with kind of like that guerrilla style warfare, like in the trenches, like, you know what I mean? Like without anyone being able to see where they are or who is who. Like that kind of war is the kind of war we've waged in countries around the world ever since. And they don't get covered at all as like, it's pioneering a style of kind of fighting back that has like once that was created, it could never be erased from that kind of the international memory, the global memory of how you fight off hegemony, but also how our warfare has to be now.
Yeah, no question. Somebody in chat says almost every Vietnamese song from this era is about a girl saying goodbye to a soldier, which of course sounds like, you know, the sort of things that you get in, you know, American songs, maybe about World War II. Although even there, it's amazing to think like the closest that World War II actually got to America was a bombing raid on a offshore colony. So that's this. Vietnamese experience the Vietnam War, would be closer to, again, like, the Russians in World War II or the Vietnamese in World War II. But yeah, so they go upriver. There's the scene we've already referred to a bit, where they're searching for weapons on this Vietnamese boat, and there ends up being a miss. It's like a much more gruesome version of the sort of backstory behind like a police murder or something like that, right? I thought they were reaching for a gun, and then
it's really interesting in the documentary that they said the crew came up with, or not the crew, the cast came up with like they said, what do you want to do? And they said, we need to do our own version of like the My Lai massacre. Like, so from that perspective, the cast maybe being anti-war informed the movie to an incredible extent, I think, even if Coppola didn't consider himself anti-war, or at least anti-Vietnam.
Yeah. And again, I think that both with Coppola and with the cast, and with Milnius and whatever, like even if you didn't see, or even if the axe you were grinding here was not necessarily an anti-war axe, that doesn't mean that anti-war ideas weren't floating around in the background. So, and in this scene, I think a lot of the ways that people are being changed as they're going upriver really crystallize so Willard, does the worst thing he does at any point in the movie, that there's a wounded Vietnamese woman, is a civilian who they're talking about getting her to the hospital, and so he just shoots her, so they don't get off course. And Lance, as Forrest mentions, takes in the puppy, from their massacre victims. And this is really where you start to see, I think, Lance just totally going off the rails, like that he can't handle this at all. And then finally they get to Kurtz, and there are bodies hanging, and there's some sort of way that there's a local tribe that that his little renegade force, fighting the war in his own way, has merged with, and they're doing the tribal, animal sacrifice rituals with, Kurtz's soldiers involved in it. And it seems like Kurtz, well, I mean, they say, right, in the narration, that Kurtz wants Willard to kill him, because that's, in a way, it almost seems like that's the only possible way that his story could end.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch Hearts of Darkness or read about the movie, you hear them saying that the way that Kurtz's the end of the movie is written, and the way that Kurtz gets offed is seemingly not how Coppola wanted to end the movie, and is sort of part of it. Well, when we get into Hearts of Darkness, we can talk about this more. But it's one of the constraints that Coppola had to deal with, was the fact that Brando was so difficult to work with, and seemingly wouldn't give them the time to actually be able to rewrite that. And because I remember when the first time I saw the movie years ago, I saw that scene, and I'm like, this it's so bizarre that it just sort of the movie fizzles out in this way after we've gone on this incredible journey and done so much in our boat trip up the river, and then it's like this guy Kurtz just sort of the killer, the guy who's created this whole like alternative society, who's waging the war according to his own methods, just sort of allows Willard to come up and assassinate him. It's just like very unsatisfying to me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in defense of it, let's try this. That Kurtz has gone on this journey where in this sort of twisted kind of quasi, Nietzschean thing where he's beyond the lies and hypocrisies of the official military. But
been blackpilled.
Yeah. Yeah.
True. Yes. There's a lot of people who've been blackpilled in this movie.
Yeah. Kurtz has been particularly blackpilled. But then like there's sort of nowhere to go with it afterwards. That he that again, like this seems like the only place for his story to end. I mean, I kind of feel, I mean, obviously something that's hit very hard throughout the movie is Willard identifying with Kurtz and sort of seeing his journey as parallel to Kurtz's. And the way I think that's handled at the very end of the movie is interesting, even if some of this was just an artifact of Marlon Brando being difficult, because after he's killed Kurtz, and then, it's sort of played as this religious ritual where everybody, makes it clear that they're ready to just accept him. He's killed the king and now he can be the king. Everybody bows down to him, but then he doesn't want to do that. Right, he's going back to the boat, but it's like one of these things. It's almost like Slavoj Žižek's line about how badly he wants a sequel to V for Vendetta. Find out what happens the next day. Like what? Okay, and then what? Right? Because he's said he's already made it very clear in the voiceover that he's not gonna. He's not just going to go back. Right? He says they're going to make me major for this, but I'm not even part of their military anymore. So he's not prepared to do what Kurtz did, but he's also not going back. So it sort of seems like he's gone through whatever sort of journey of self-discovery there is here, but there's just nowhere left to go for him. And so I think it, like the movie, in a way, it couldn't have ended 5 minutes later, because that like really is it. And then it feels like Kurtz's death is somewhat similar, that he sort of got into this point where he's going to do this, but okay, then what's the plan, right? Is he just going to like try to form a durable independent state? Doesn't seem like it, right? So I think just kind of accepting that, all right, the bill has come due, this guy is going to come kill me, almost seems like the only, it's very unclear given how they set it up, how else it even could end, although that might be a defense of it and that might be a criticism.
Well, it made a lot of sense. It made more sense to me watching Hearts of Darkness.
Yeah, let's get into Hearts of Darkness.
When they explained that he's dying in the story, like in the original story, Kurtz is already kind of on his deathbed when like the Willard character comes to him. So it kind of made sense. And then I think in this it's more of a metaphysical kind of death, like because they have that one line where Dennis Hopper, like the photojournalist, he's like, I think he's dying, man, like. But it makes a lot more sense when they showed the picture in the Hearts of Darkness of them carrying him out on like the stretcher when you're first introduced to him, because he's kind of experiencing this spiritual and physical death. But I think in the movie they kind of just decided to make it, or in Apocalypse Now, seems like they made it more of a spiritual death.
And it comes at the same time as they're sacrificing that cow or whatever it is you see, which I was like, when I saw that, I was like, hopefully this is just a doll that they're chopping up, and then you find out, no, that was a real animal that they are hacking to pieces in front of us.
To be fair, it's not something they did, especially, that like the actual group in the Philippines that they were, who were making up all the extras. This is just something they did. They said these are rituals that are part of their culture, and they let us film some of them. but yeah, and also
this is a really famous piece of film lore too. When they talk about like, like the no animals were harmed in the making of this movie kind of thing. There's lists out there of like movies that they actually did slaughter, and that's like, Apocalypse Now is the most famous one.
Yeah, and you see like just before Kurtz is finally assassinated, you see a couple of books on his desk, which one of them I forget the authors. Weston, I think, is one of them. But anyway, it's From Ritual to Romance is one of them, and The Golden Bough is another. And these are books about mythology and ritual, and I know they're both major inspirations for T.S. Eliot's poem "The Wasteland," which you don't hear, but you do hear Kurtz reading another T.S. Eliot poem, "The Hollow Men."
You also had give them an argument behind him when you
yeah, it's a funny fact that obviously got to have that copy, give them an argument in the background, but didn't do that. But there was that line about dialectical logic. It was a little confusing what exactly Dennis Hopper was trying to say about it, but I was wondering when I watched Hearts of Darkness, because I watched it twice because I wanted to be like, because I really wanted to. That story is crazy. I don't think I took it all in the first time. Yeah,
because it was late and I watched it after watching Apocalypse Now, and I was like, I need to watch. Like I was packing my stuff because I just moved. I was like, all right, I need to sit down and actually watch this and like process it again. So the crazy thing is, was that just kind of what Dennis Hopper was like? Like, because they made it seem like that's just kind of what Dennis Hopper was like, and they kind of pushed him into playing this role.
Well, that's also who his character's supposed to be, right? I mean, like you're not supposed to parse every line that he utters. It's just sort of like he is like the hippie who's like on a permanent trip and like can't come back, and he sees something in Kurtz that speaks to him while he's on that trip, and like. And that's just, he's talking about, whether he's talking about dialectics or Dianetics, it doesn't matter. Like, that's just him just, free associating, basically.
Well, bringing up like the Rick Perlstein thing again, because I just finished The Invisible Bridge and now I'm on Reagan. Mm-hmm. But they talk about at the end of The Invisible Bridge, like the obsession in the 70s with these like self-help guru, like, like kind of like the search for meaning. And it feels like for him, not for the Vietnamese or Cambodian, tribes that he's like kind of converted into this like, death cult, but specifically for him, this seems like his version of like that self-discovery cult, that he doesn't necessarily understand it. At the end of The Invisible Bridge, they're talking about that one cult that like kind of like they're screaming at you.
Oh yeah.
And then they're like, and everybody's like, oh, well, I spent $2,000 on it. So yeah, I get it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so it seems like he's been kind of pushed into something like that. Whereas
they did a version of that cult in 6 Feet Under, for anybody who ever watched that show. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't remember what it was called. Yes, they do. Somebody does point out in the chat, Kurtz does throw his book at the dialectics babble. So, Kurtz, having clearly read, give them an argument and understanding misrepresenting, dialectical methodology doesn't stand for it. But yeah, let's get into Hearts of Darkness, because this is a fascinating movie. Just the making of movie, which just to kick things off here, like one of the weirdest things in a movie with many, many weird things in it is like the documentary in its own strange way, is as interesting as the movie. They were filming this in the Philippines. That Coppola used some of his Godfather money to make a deal with the right-wing dictator, Marco, and as part of that deal, they loaned out a bunch of helicopters and stuff, and soldiers from the Filipino military to for Coppola's use in the movie, but they were simultaneously and not that far away fighting like trying to suppress a communist insurgency in the Philippines. So on any given day, sometimes they're in the middle of the shooting and they say, no, sorry, we actually need those helicopters today.
Yeah, that is the most mind-boggling thing about the movie. By the way, the only reason that they turned to the Philippines to Marcos to use his helicopters is because the U.S. military would not loan them their own, because they did not approve of the script, and they thought that, well, I mean, we have a essay by I think by Eileen Jones from a few Jacobin issues ago where she goes through all of these movies like that, where the reasons that the U.S. military turned down using their equipment because they didn't approve of the script, and in fact they would demand, they would say it wasn't like a flat no. It was like, well, we would loan this to you if you would make X, Y, and Z changes in your script, which is a really it's a real view inside of the manufacturing consent, the role that the U.S. military plays in manufacturing consent through Hollywood.
Well, they still have like they have a military office in Hollywood, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, watch like so many of the Marvel movies now are basically just extended, like was it Miss Marvel? That's like basically an extended commercial for the Air Force. The
craziest expose on this. I can't remember if it's in Common Dreams or if it's something like that. The Seth Rogen, James Franco, North Korea movie. There's this really weird expose they did into. They had a guy from the State Department who was like their North Korean expert or something that really wanted to push war with North Korea, that rewrote and took notes on their script. And like they did like a whole like interview with the guy into like his obsession with bombing and killing Kim Jong-un. It was
yeah.
Even movies that are like supposed to be, comedies are treated like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think they even said in Hearts of Darkness, they really didn't want to do any, like the military really didn't want any piece of anything that was going to be set during the Vietnam War at that point.
Because there's the only way you can, like we were talking about people who earlier we were saying, oh, well, so-and-so is anti-Vietnam War or whatever. Like the only way you can not, if you're portraying the basic facts of what took place in the Vietnam War, it's like an anti-war narrative. I mean, it's like an insane war filled with some of the worst human rights atrocities ever committed by the United States. And so the only way that you don't tell a narrative like that is if you're willing to submit to like, the John Wayne Green Berets style, just empty propaganda for the American state, which is of course what the U.S. military machine wants, right? Like that's what they're looking for in Hollywood. That's what they're hoping to gain out of, dangling we'll give you the keys to the helicopters if you, make us out to be something other than what we were in Vietnam.
Yeah, totally. By the way, in your Vietnam viewing excursion, have you actually subjected yourself to the Ballad of the Green Berets?
I haven't. I know that I need to get to it eventually. I mean, I know what it is. I know that it is that piece of empty propaganda. I did watch Hotel Hanoi, which is really not that far away from what I assume the Green Berets is. It's a real and it's I probably like the Green Berets, another movie where they somehow managed to like, okay, yeah, we lost the Vietnam War, but like in this battle, the U.S. soldiers won. They held firm against their North Vietnamese captives or whatever, and it's this sort of very funny, intellectual contortions and narrative contortions that you have to do in order to spin a U.S. victory out of the war, and what was clearly the most incredible and stunning U.S. loss that has been seen.
Yeah, no question.
But can I say about Hearts of Darkness? So like, Hearts of Darkness is this documentary about the movie. And for me, what's interesting about Hearts of Darkness really has nothing to do with most of what we've been talking about in terms of like narratives about the Vietnam War. I mean, there is very, wild stuff like you mentioned with the helicopters having to be pulled away to fight their own communist insurgency, where the sort of Cold War is bleeding over into the filmmaking. Of course, Marcos, backed by the U.S. because he was he was happy to carry out that kind of insurgency against the communists in Philippines. But to me, what's so fascinating about the documentary is the portrait that it paints of this guy Coppola, who, as you mentioned, is coming off of this enormous success of Godfather 1 and 2, is seen rightfully as the greatest director of his generation, and he gets all the the accolades for it. He wins Oscars. He's gotten extremely rich, and he's young. I think he's he's in his late 30s when he makes this movie. And it's almost like you get the sense in watching Hearts of Darkness, that all of the stuff that he did before Apocalypse Now, all of the making of Godfather 1 and 2, like he only did that so that he could then make Apocalypse Now. I mean, that's like almost the narrative that comes across. And he is so willing to just put everything that he has gotten up to that point. I mean, he's like financing the movie himself. He's putting up his own house against, he's putting it up in order to finance the movie. I mean, he's like making all of these incredible personal sacrifices to be able to make this movie according to his own vision and not according to the dictates of any of the Hollywood studios, at least not the dictates that a filmmaker would normally be subjected to for a film that is financed by them. And to me, that's incredible. It's incredible that anybody would do that at all. And then much less that when you watch the documentary, you're so cognizant of all of these pieces that have to line up in order for him to pull off this movie. I mean, like, he's got to negotiate the helicopters from the Philippines. He has to negotiate getting let into the Philippines. He has to put his own money up. He has to hire an army of Filipino workers to make these elaborate sets. He's got all of these things. And then he's dealing with these incredibly, wild personalities like Marlon Brando, which we mentioned, but also he's going through these incredible transformative moments with Martin Sheen, who's like in the early the scenes that we didn't mention much of, when he's in he's drunk in the hotel in Saigon and he punches the mirror, and like Martin Sheen is like Martin Sheen, the person, not Willard. Yeah. Sheen himself is like going through these wrenching existential issues.
Yeah, they said he was like during, to be clear, right? Like during that scene in the hotel room, that he was incredibly drunk while filming it. And like, that was not a planned thing with, smashing the window. He just like didn't quite realize how close he was to it. And, a lot of that was just drunkenly improvised.
It was his birthday or something too, right? They said it.
Oh yeah. It was his 36th birthday.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And he had a heart attack.
Heart attack. I mean, and then he has the heart attack, and then you see Coppola on the phone trying to like tamp down the story of the fact that she had a heart attack and convince the press that something else happened. I think they said he was exhausted or had heat stroke or something. Because if they found out that he had a heart attack and reported that, then they'd be pulling the studios would be pulling their money, and they would like basically the project would have been sunk at that point. Oh, we didn't mention that like Sheen was the second choice. Like they actually started filming with a different actor, and then Coppola decided they had to act. I mean,
would have been a so much weirder fucking movie. Martin Sheen role.
Yeah, it's like one of my my all-time favorite facts that one of the actors who was initially being considered for Humphrey Bogart's role in Casablanca was Ronald Reagan.
Oh god. Yeah, that's wild. So we're just scratching the surface of all of the things that Coppola had to line up to make this movie, and it's hard for me to fully like articulate why I found this so moving watching it. Actually, one thing that helped me articulate this was listening to the new episode of Chapo Trap House this week, where they're talking about Avatar and about Cameron. Yeah. And I think it's a great episode. And somewhere at the end of the episode, one of the hosts says something about how directors like Cameron are the last like true administrators. Like they're like what they are carrying out to make a movie like an Avatar, or certainly like a movie like Apocalypse Now, is just the logistical details combined with the clarity of vision, combined with the sort of like a football player running down the field, like stiff arming over here, like juking over here, like catching a block over here. Like it's astonishing. It's truly like one of the greatest like logistical feats that I'm aware of in recent history, combined with this artistic vision on top of it. I mean, the movie sort of just made. I mean, as a socialist, I'm supposed to be like, fuck Francis Ford Coppola or whatever, right? Because he's this rich guy, as we know. Yeah. But like in watching it, it's clear that only Coppola, the rich guy, could have pulled this off. He had to make Godfather 1 and 2 in order to get the financial independence, so that he could then run down that field, and he still had to catch all those blocks and do all those stiff arms in order to make this movie happen. And it's just like, it's a miracle. It's a true incredible human feat that he was able to pull this off. And I was saying to another Jacobin editor, I was kind of giving this speech to Sean Goody, another Jacobin editor, the other day, and he made the good and proper socialist point, which is what's his name? The point, I'm less concerned about the content of Albert Einstein's brain.
Yeah, Stephen Jay Gould.
Yeah, Stephen Jay Gould. I'm less interested in the contents of his brain than of all of the people with similar talents who their brains lied fallow in sweatshops and cotton fields and wherever else. And of course, that is true, and that's a good point. And we should think about the fact that why is it that only a guy like Francis Ford Coppola can pull this kind of thing off? On the other hand, clearly Francis Ford Coppola is a man of singular genius in order to be able to pull this off. And I have an appreciation for him using that genius in I mean, he could have just used it to continue to make whatever bullshit blockbuster movies, which he then did for the rest of his life. But he did this one, and I'm grateful for that.
He's also kind of loaning out, though, the fact that he is this talented artist, because if he didn't have that reputation, people wouldn't have followed him blindly into the Philippines to make this. You know what I mean? Like, even his wife is like, well, it's less important. I mean, who knows if that's what she was saying in the moment, but it's less important that that we have our nice house, that we have the millions of dollars. You'll just make something else that will get us that money back. Everyone's like, oh, he's like a genius. The fact that he's a genius is pushing all of the people involved in it to go further and further and further, because at the end of it, they're thinking to themselves oh, this is going to be huge. There's the thing where what's the writer's name again? He comes in to convince him to.
Oh, Milnius.
Milius.
Yeah. But I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
He comes in to convince him to end it and just write things down, and everyone's losing it, and he convinces him that he's going to win a Nobel Peace Prize because this movie is going to be so transformative. And then he comes out and he makes the the Hitler thing where he comes in to say, we're out of gas. He goes, we don't need no gas. That moment in the documentary.
Yeah. He's the general who has to tell Hitler that they're out of gas on the Eastern Front, and and then but then Hitler with his charisma is gonna convince him that they can still pull it off.
So he's using that though to push these people into, because there's no experience of filmmaking that's anything like what they talked about in Apocalypse. They're in Hearts of Darkness, that went into the making of this film. They literally just went in and just there's barely had a script, barely by the end of it, you know what I mean? He's just doing this over and over again. He's just pretty much doing whatever, just using whatever do stuff, just coming up with things on the fly. And if he wasn't such a genius in the first place, nobody would have given him the artistic license, whether he's funding the movie himself or not. If some random guy just comes that's never made a movie before, goes, oh, I saw the Tommy Wiseau thing where he's I have $6 million somehow, let's make a movie. Everyone would be fuck off. We're not trusting or the fucking jungle of the Philippines to do this. No.
Yeah, no, for sure. He certainly wouldn't have gotten actors that caliber to give him that credit. Thank you, Jacob, for the super chat. Says, hi, I'm from Holland, obsessed with this movie. Perhaps my favorite behind the scenes stories. Martin Sheen's heart attack. I
have to say, I agree with Jacob. I have not stopped thinking about this movie, and nor of Hearts of Darkness for weeks. Everyone who's around me, which is obviously not very many people, but anybody whose ear I get, I'm I need to talk to you about Hearts of Darkness and about Apocalypse Now.
Well, it's not even seen, him hiding that. It's not even seen as a thing to be ashamed about. It's his wife making that documentary, and she's no, here's some recordings of him blatantly hiding his heart attack,
because that just shows how dedicated he was. Yeah. I mean, and I do kind of I think my my position. I think Micah and Sean are both right. So that on the one hand, it is on the one hand, for sure, right? The Stephen Jay Gould point applies, which is actually, interestingly enough, is the thought that the movie closes on. Is Coppola, that Hearts of Darkness closes on, is Coppola talking about how it's I don't know when Hearts of Darkness was made exactly, but he's like, now that everybody has these little handheld, you know, camcorders, you know, maybe there's some 8-year-old girl somewhere who could become the, you know, the Mozart of film, and, you know, just blow everybody away with her artistic, you know, genius, you know, so at least in that case, hoping that technological development will, you know, make it more egalitarian. But, you know, but the core of the point is there. But at the same time, like, also this is, I mean, sure, more people should get a chance to do it, but like, this is also an amazing thing. And it's something that's even given me pause sometime thinking about the, what I'd like the structure of a post-capitalist economy to be
exactly.
like.
Yes, this is where my mind went in watching the film, which will probably, you know, given your next big project, Ben. I mean, this is the kind of thing that you guys are probably thinking about in terms of like market socialism or whatever. But like, yeah, what would it? How do we democratically decide who gets to make an apocalypse now in the future, right? Because like, well, this was not a democratic production, right? This is like Coppola the dictator, Coppola the wealthy dictator, who then is making deals with other dictators of a different kind, who then gets to make this movie because of that. And like, obviously every piece of that has these serious moral compromises, things that, I mean, we're literally witnessing this sort of machinery of death in the helicopters, which then you see in the documentary takes a detour from playing the machinery of death on screen to actually going and killing, you know, Filipino peasants over here.
Right.
So anyway, yeah, like, it seems weird for me to sort of admit this to myself, but I'm grateful to Coppola that he managed to pull this off, despite all of the compromises that had to be made. That he had that clarity of vision, as well as the ability logistically to hold all the pieces together and pulled the thing off. But like, yeah, the question is how would you, if we lived in an actually democratic society where resources were allocated in a democratic way, how do we choose who gets the apocalypse now treatment, who gets the absurd amount of resources to go and follow this crazy vision and pull something off like this? I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. And once we have, right, like I actually do kind of think, you know, thinking about examples like this, that we'd like, you know, that maybe some, you know, whatever cooperatives that, you know, that make, you know, they, you know, worker owned, you know, American zoetrope or whatever, that should like actually should have, like, constitutionally, you know, there should be people who maybe like you could have a variety of other decisions that wouldn't be in their hands, but like, you know, I think you actually do want that artistically to, you know, to have at least a sort of limited scope dictatorship, you know, within something like the making of a movie. So yeah, that's a fascinating question, you know, what that could look like and how that could fit into.
That's an equally decided dictatorship in some ways. Like in the sense of like people are volunteering to be part of that system. You know what I mean? Like, because you always hear about people like wanting to quit movies, and they do. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not a situation where it's like people working at like a fast food restaurant. They need that job to survive, and they're stuck. Like, it's people following a passion of theirs that kind of have.
That's true. Even under the current system, there's much more meaningful freedom of exit and something like that, and there would presumably be way more, right, in a society where nobody's like, you know, because there are people, you know, for whom movies or sports or other things, you know, that like might be like very elite professions, but are still their way out of poverty. And so in a society without poverty, and you'd have even, you know, even less of that. Still some tricky logistical questions, but again, I think that this example does show why this is worth thinking about. Those are logistical questions that you want to ask, right? Because you genuinely don't want to have, you know, I mean, if to have, you know, movies that are you know, that are made by, you know, by committee, you know, to an even greater extent than, you know, what we already get in the Hollywood studio system, which is often bad enough.
Say, that already is a committee every time somebody wants to say. I think something I will say about filmmaking, even within this capitalist structure right now, and I don't say this about a lot of things, but technology has kind of democratized who gets to movies who gets to use these resources, not in the way that we would want as socialists necessarily, but the access to those resources have come into, like, it becomes easier and easier to make something, even if it's not something on the scale of Apocalypse Now, but it becomes easier and easier to make something, for yourself. Like,
you can't make
easier.
you can't make Apocalypse Now without an ungodly amount of money. That hasn't changed, but you can make, like, if you're just making like an indie movie that's sort of quiet and realistic and doesn't have a lot of helicopters in it, you can make a pretty slick version of that, with a pretty low budget.
I mean, at some point there is always going to be some form of meritocracy, in the sense of as people prove that they're able to do this kind of thing, like, because directing a movie is a very specific task. You know what I mean? It's a top down, very specific task, and there's always going to be some form of meritocracy, probably, in how much resources people get. But as socialists, everybody should have access to those resources in some form. They should, if that's something that they want to do, they should have, they should be able to get educated in it. They should be able to learn about it. They should be able to make a living off of it, even if, that's not how resources to the scale of Apocalypse Now get distributed.
Yeah, fair enough. Ian Adelstein, thank you for the super chat. Says, I was in Tokaji, Hungary last year. They lamented that the legendary wine quality greatly declined during the Soviet-dominated period because they prioritized table wine. Of course, then again, to our point, there were some amazing movies made in the early Soviet Union. But yeah, look, I think that on the meritocracy point, I think we could also separate out a couple of things that which are competition for prestige and for resources being used for the sake of making something, with prestige, and distribution of resources in the sense that, like, it's not just that he had a lot of money at this point, that like Francis Ford Coppola can continue to be very rich, afterwards, because of the proceeds of this. I think I actually think that in a radically more egalitarian society, certain kinds of competition for prestige, might actually be more intense because they're the only remaining outlet, for those kind. Like, you can't have, if you're not actually competing for resources, prestige is the only game in town, and I'm kind of okay with that, right? Like, I don't want to live in a society where due to some combination of skills that happen to be useful in this particular society at this particular time, that different people are born with different levels of that. Like, some people just can't have good lives, but I am comfortable, having some sort of, cutthroat meritocratic competition to see who, who's considered to be a legendary filmmaker, or who makes it into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or, any of those things. Yeah.
As Peter Coffin says a lot, like, attention is currency in the marketplace of ideas. Like, it's that's never gonna, like, you can never, in a future, even a utopian society, you can't force everybody to want to watch a bad movie. You can equally distribute resources to people so that they can make, like, art in some way, shape, or form. But that prestige comes from people deciding, this is something that I liked watching, this is something good, this is something that I enjoyed. That's not going to go away, no matter kind of, what I mean? Like, no matter where you are or what the society looks like. That's its own kind of thing.
And under capitalism, our conception of prestige is so tied up with what are often incredibly lucrative compensation that you get for that prestige. That's how you get rewarded for doing what the society has decided is a good thing to do. But it's possible to imagine an uncoupling of those things. I mean, Peter Fraze talks about this in
I was just thinking about Four Futures. Yeah, that he says that. It's not that you wouldn't, like, it was written too early to be in response to Peterson, but in response to the usual sort of Jordan Peterson point about this, it's not that status hierarchies, wouldn't exist in the communist one of the Four Futures. It's that you probably have lots of much more disentangled status hierarchies because they wouldn't all be organized around the central hierarchy of money.
Yeah, exactly. I think he gives the example of Wikipedia, and like people get rewarded on Wikipedia for making edits or doing certain kind of writing. And obviously there's not a financial compensation for those people, but like within that realm, there is like, you get prestige, or you get certain kinds of rewards for having done good edits or done good writing. And when within that world, you get compensated in that way. But that's a way that doesn't lead to additional economic stratification, or doesn't mean that somebody else doesn't get to feed their family or pay their rent on time. It's like, but it is your sort of form of non-economic compensation in that way.
It's interesting with people that actually want to make films, like, because I went to school for it. Like, I know a lot of people that like really want that. Most of those people don't give a fuck about the financial compensation. They want to be an artist. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's how they picture themselves. That's how they see somebody like Coppola. Like, they're like, this is the pinnacle, not because he's rich and can make whatever he wants. It's because he's talented and because he's an amazing artist and because he's willing to put everything on the line of that. Look at somebody like Michael Bay or something, or like the Transformers movies. They put so much fucking money into those. Nobody likes them. Nobody wants to watch them. You might be able to go to walk down a red.
Yeah, or lots of people went to watch when they came out, but I think it's pretentious, but I mean it's the David Hume point from the Standard of Taste that it's like what lasts, right? What are people going to enjoy at like one time in one culture, whatever, versus like what's going to be enjoyed by lots of people in lots of different countries far into the future. And and so like 100 gazillion people might see a Michael Bay movie when it first comes out, but how many people are going to watch that same movie 5 years later?
I've seen a few of those movies, and I have to tell you, like Avengers movies or whatever, and I could not tell you a single thing that I saw in any of those movies. They become the highest grossing movies literally of all time, cracking $1 billion or whatever. I can't recall a single scene, a single line, any of it. But like that's obviously not what they're for. And what a striking condemnation of how we make movies today is that like it's just this sort of this fluff that it just like it goes up and there's a flare and it disappears just as quickly it disappears. It has no kind of staying power. And certainly when you're watching a movie like Apocalypse Now, you're just like movies like this really don't get made very often. And then you watch Hearts of Darkness and then you're like, oh yeah, that's why.
That's why.
This is what goes into it.
Because one of the best filmmakers ever was using a tremendous amount of his own money and nearly going crazy, spending years trying to make it happen. So it's certainly not a surprise that
the crazy thing though is that he's kind of writing off the Godfather movies, like, oh, that's just something that is for the money. Actually, pretty much everybody's like, what's one of the greatest movies of all time? Like The Godfather. It's beautiful, beautifully shot. Like the plot, and he's like, fuck that. Like, I want to go make Apocalypse Now, and that's all I want.
Yeah, fair enough. Somebody, Joe, thank you for the super chats. The future you speak of sounds good. I'm getting really tired of this wage labor. How do I get out? Well, subscribe to Jacobin, join DSA, and if you figure out the third part of the plan, let me know.
We'll have you on the stream to explain to the rest of us.
Absolutely. Well, really appreciate this, guys. This was a lot of fun. So, Micah, in your recent discovery that movies are sometimes good, have you watched Goodfellas?
I watched Goodfellas years ago. I know that I got to return to it because it's one of the all-time classics. I'll get there eventually. I'm working my way through some of the others. I'm going through Scorsese. I'm going through Oliver Stone. I recently I've gone through I think 8 or 9 John Carpenter movies, including the bad ones. So I'm making my way through some of the goats, and it's very enjoyable. And thank God, because what else would I be doing during this pandemic if I didn't have a task like that?
I just subscribed to like the Criterion channel or whatever for $10 a month. That is all the old movies because it seems to have a lot of stuff that you couldn't really see anywhere else. A lot of foreign stuff.
Well, if you want to get around to it before next Thursday, we'd love to have you.
Oh, you're talking about it next Thursday. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, yeah, I'll see what I can. I'll see what I can do. It's a long one, right? It's a 3-hour one. Also, I'm just like, I've gone down this Vietnam hole and I can't get out. So maybe that would help force me to start, because I have to tell you, it's not fun. Like, you're saying that you watched Apocalypse Now an infinite number of times. I watched that movie and I was just like I can't do that again. And that's how most of these movies that aren't the totally empty reactionary garbage ones are. They're just so depleting. It is so exhausting to watch. But
it's depleting in a whole nother way than any other Vietnam movie. There's movies that just fill you with despair. It doesn't just fill you with despair. It's like a fucking acid trip.
Well, yeah, which is the point, right? That's what he's trying to do with the whole thing, right? Yeah.
And what the actors apparently were doing at the
Well, if you want to take a break, you want to block out 2.5 hours for Goodfellas. We'd love to have you back to talk to me at Forrest next Thursday. And if you do that, I will see if I can get my hands on a knit cap so I feel less left out here.
I'm in the front of my apartment where it's very cold. We have a lot of windows up here, and so I gotta wear this. But yeah, it does look a little. Maybe that would look weirder though if we all three had knit caps. That'd be bizarre.
I usually wear like the beanies with the pom poms, but I found Target when I was in Long Island like a few weeks ago, and there was nothing else to do but go to Target. So I really like this. It was like $10.
All right, fair enough. Thanks everybody for showing up and watching. Really appreciate that. As always, people ask questions, super chats. Makes this fun. So I will be back to tomorrow night with Cole James Cash to talk about the appointment of a friend of the show, Neera Tandon, to head the Office of Management and Budget. We'll hopefully see some of you then. Till then, left is best.